Okay. Welcome, everybody. I'm Judy Mark. I am the president of Disability Voices United. Hope you all survived the earthquake at 2 o'clock this morning, which did no damage except to my sleep cycle. So I'm very tired today. We are so happy to have you. We do SDP Connect every other Wednesday, usually. Sometimes we do it. We skip a Wednesday here or there because of other events. I wanted to, before we get started with the great program today, I wanted to just give a few announcements. The first announcement is for those of you who attended our conference in early December, you should have received by email the links to all of both the big full conference panels and speakers, as well as all 20 breakout sessions. We have also a number of those sessions with Spanish and a number of those sessions in Korean. And if you were a conference registrant and did not receive that email with those links, please put your email in the chat and our conference administrator, Kira, will note that. Or you can send a message to Kira Ciriola. You will see her in your list. She's one of the co-hosts. And send her an email to make sure you get it. Now, for those of you who did not register for the conference, you will be able to have access to all of those recordings as well for a small fee. We are putting out that email tomorrow, giving you that access. And so look in your emails for that. If you're not on our mailing list for some reason, please do join our mailing list. We'll put that link in the chat as well to get on our mailing list. If you just go to our website, disabilityvoicesunited.org, you'll be able to get on our mailing list that way as well. So that was the first announcement. The second announcement is that many of you may remember that DVU was involved in an effort last year to reform the fair hearing process. That when you disagree with a decision of your regional center, you can go before a judge and argue your case. Well, that system we were calling the unfair hearing system. And that is, we were able to get a law passed last year, and we are doing a big webinar on it, or a big meeting on, we're calling it a town hall on February 7th from 5 to 6:30 p.m. We have already gotten some information about that out to folks through our weekly mail, and we will continue to do that. Maybe, Kira, if you have a moment, you could put the registration for the fair hearing and the flyer in the chat. Oh, somebody just, thank you, Sally, for posting in the chat that you can't wait for the book. I have a great announcement. The book is done. Dun, 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 dun. It was sent to the printer 2 days ago, and it is being printed as we speak. I have to tell you, it took 3 months to rewrite this book in between all the other work that we were doing. Literally every page is changed with the exception of the principles of self-determination, but every single other page. It includes directives as recently as January 20th, and it was sent to the printer on January 23rd. So that is how up to date it is. Of course, there will be new directives coming out any minute, and so therefore it will be out of date at that point. But it really is quite an achievement of ours to get it done. We are also completely translating the book into both Spanish and Korean. And so we really would love to get that out to folks. If you registered and paid for our conference, either you paid privately or your regional center or FMS or your employer paid for you to attend, you will receive a copy of the book in the mail within the next few weeks. It's going to take the printer 7 to 10 days to print all those books. And then, of course, we have to get them all mailed to you. But hopefully within the next 2 to 3 weeks, most of you will be getting them in the mail. If for some reason you feel like the payment hasn't been made for you to have attended the conference, please go to the, please contact Monica at dvunited.org, and she can look to see if your regional center has paid for you or your FMS. She can verify those things, okay? So if folks wouldn't mind putting stuff in the chat, things I'm saying, so that people can, like Monica's email address and things like that. All right, so then just real quickly, I wanted to go over a couple of new directives that just came out that I wanted to share to keep everyone as up to date as possible. So this was a directive that just came out 5 days ago. It's actually not new information, but I wanted to let everybody know. So this is a directive that extends the date for the requirement of regional centers to notify your FMS within 3 business days of any changes to your spending plan. And it requires regional centers to pay FMSs on a weekly basis. We are hearing honestly that even though this original directive was put into effect, I believe sometime in November, September, was the September 12th guidance, that FMSs are still not being paid regularly, and that in fact, the largest FMS is currently owed over $6 million by regional centers. So, it's a really big problem when you're owed that much money as an FMS to be able to continue to do business in the state. So that is one directive. Now I'm going to stop sharing that, and I'm going to share a second directive. This directive just came out yesterday. It is not specifically on the self-determination program, but it is a really, really important directive for folks to know. And it is about what's called the Home and Community-Based Services Final Rule, which sounds very bureaucratic, but what it is, it's a series of rules from the federal government, or it's a guidance from the federal government that we consider civil rights progress for people with disabilities. It basically says that people with disabilities should have full access and to the benefits of living in the community and thriving in the community. So you should know that people in the self-determination program have been required to follow these inclusion rules since the very first day that the self-determination program started, because we're a new program. The people who are in the traditional system, however, have not had to follow it until this year. And it goes into effect, the rule goes into effect on March 17th, 2023, in less than 2 months. What this letter states, just so that people know, is that regional centers are not going to be providing any referrals or authorizations to any vendors who have not submitted documentation showing that they are either currently following the new rules, or they have a plan to follow those rules in the next year. That is pretty huge. For those of you who are thinking about coming into the self-determination program and are currently in the traditional system, you need to know that your service provider may or may not be around on March 17th. There is also a requirement in this directive that DDS is requiring regional centers to contact any individuals in these who are getting services that they could possibly lose because the service providers have not changed their programs enough so that if they are what's called compliant with the service, with the rules. There is going to be future directives that DDS is providing out, which is basically going to say that as of March 17th, people who are getting, who are not people, but the service providers who are running these programs that are not compliant or don't have a plan, what's called a corrective action plan to become, to follow the rules, are going to start getting significantly less in their rates. Their rates are going to go down anywhere from 25 to 50%, which basically means it'll be impossible for them to do business. So if any of you are either in the kinds of services and those kinds of services are things like work activity program, day program that is center-based, or in any kind of segregated type program, including group homes. If any of you live in these kinds of settings or get services in these kinds of settings, things are going to be changing radically in the next 2 months. And we are going to be, DVU is working with a range of other organizations, regional centers, service providers, Disability Rights California, to get information to you to ensure that you are not surprised by these changes that are coming your way. By the way, we've known about these changes since 2014. It's almost been a decade. So it should come as no surprise to anyone. So feel free at the end of this, if any of you have questions for me on these new directives, I'll answer them, as well as questions related to today's topic. Okay. All right. So let's move on to today's topic. Once again, don't forget to pick a language if you've just entered entered our Zoom room, because I'm sure we will have some questions in Spanish. And Korean. All right, so the topic of, are you going to introduce the topic of today, Tim? Okay, so first of all, let me introduce Tim. Tim Jin is DVU's co-director of empowerment programs, who's going to be helping to lead, or leading mostly, the program today. Go ahead, Tim.
Hi everyone, this is our second SDP Connect for the new year, and what a wowzer 2023 has already been. As many of you know, my name is Tim and I'm the co-director of the empowerment programs. I just got a new title with a promotion to start off the new year, but I will always be grounded and stay true to my roots and always be involved with self-determination and SDP Connect. We are always here, together, supporting each other on a much broader basis to help everyone that chooses to be in self-determination. If you need individual help, there are many resources available out there, such as many independent facilitators that will help you with what you need. Also, there are SDP local advisory committees at 21 regional centers that meet frequently that you can address your concerns, suggestions, and success stories on how the program has assisted you in your goal. There are plenty of resources to support the program. You are never alone, and I encourage you to never give up. Self-determination is achievable. Wow, Judy, who would have thought that I had this much to say and wrote an essay as my introduction? Would you please start us off with what we are covering today on SDP Connect? There is a permanent toe print on my iPad screen, right next to the play button, because I can speak a lot.
Thank you, Tim. So the subject matter today is SDP is pros and cons of recruiting staff versus using an agency. So one of the great things about the self-determination program is that you can hire your own staff and you don't have to use an agency to do so. It gives you a lot more choice and control. At the same time, a lot of people believe that using an agency makes their lives a lot easier. But you could also have a combination of the two, right? You can use an agency for some staff and you can hire staff directly. That's the wonderful flexibility that exists in the self-determination program. So today we have a number of speakers who will be talking about their personal experiences with hiring staff. Our first speaker is my dear friend, Howard McBroom. Howard has been in the self-determination program for a number of years. He was one of the original phase-in participants, 4 years. He has been in the program, and he is here with his wonderful, fabulous independent facilitator, Taleen, who is from Guidelight Group. And I'm going to let you take it away. Howard, I just want to point out that you are currently muted, so don't forget to unmute before you speak. And Taleen, you as well.
Okay, can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Howard McBroom, and I am indeed in the self-determination program. Actually, I was the first person at the Lanterman Regional Center to get into the self-determination program, and I will be starting my 4th year this April. And today we are going to talk about the differences between agencies and hiring your own staff. And I'm going to begin by talking about my agency. Taleen, can you put up my our presentation?
Kara, are you going to put that up, or should I?
I will. My impression was that you would, Taleen, but if you give me a minute, I can do that.
Oh, thanks, Ed. I would appreciate that.
All right, just one moment.
It'll make it easier for me to see the chat notes in case there's a question to answer along the way. And I will start off by letting everyone know that Howard has, over the past 4 years, had numerous opportunities to discuss whether he should stay with an agency or start hiring his own staff. So this isn't a decision that he took lightly. He didn't just stay with an agency because he didn't have an option. It's because he chose to in his case. He also had the opportunity to work with multiple companies. And so we'll be talking a little bit about not only pros and cons, but also what to look for in what we call a good agency and what does that mean. I think that's an important element here. It took a little bit of time to find him the right agency, right, Howard?
Right.
And we also put together some best practices for those of you who choose to stay with an agency.
Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And our topic for today is using agency and FTP, pros and cons, by Howard McBroom and Taleen. And I want to stress at the outset that it is very important, I mean very important, I cannot emphasize this enough, that you are going to hire an agency, be sure and hire an agency that is committed to person-centered thinking at all levels and has an FDP mindset. Remember that there is no perfect agency. You need to find one that has the best fit for you. Find an agency that is active in your area and can meet your specific needs.
So when we talk about hiring staff, what we're talking about is hiring staff through an agency. So what are the pros and cons of hiring them, and then also the managing piece next. So to begin with, we wanted to talk a little bit about what advantage Howard has in using an agency when it comes to hiring staff. Howard has less responsibility to hiring staff, and the advantage to him is that it is more calming for him, so he doesn't have to worry about whether or not he's hiring the right staff for himself. And so he has someone else doing that for him. He does have input on who is in his home. He's worked with some agencies that didn't give him that, and so finding the right agency gave him that opportunity as well. But the things that make it easier for him are that Howard doesn't have to do any of the paperwork, doesn't have to track any of the background checks. He doesn't have to worry about interviewing multiple people and saying yes and no to them. He doesn't have to worry about training them on the general level, right? However, when it comes to the details, of course, Howard is very much involved with training the staff in his home. And also the agency itself has a bigger pool of people to choose from to hire. If Howard were to try to hire his own, then he's putting an ad out, and he's only able to hire the people who apply to his ad, who might be willing to pay to work for an individual. While there's a lot of people out there who choose to work for an agency because they feel like it offers better benefits, or they can get time off easier. And so it's important for those individuals. So it gives Howard a chance to have an option to hire, to have a bigger pool of people to choose from. The downsides, of course, is that you don't always get who you want in your home, especially if it's not a good agency or they're not listening to what Howard's needs are. Howard also has a hearing impairment, which makes it very difficult for him to understand individuals who might have a strong accent. So that becomes a barrier for him. Some individuals come into his home less experienced and not as well trained. Again, back to the question of, what does it mean to have a good agency? We'll talk to you in a minute about. Howard is, the downside is you're at the mercy of who they hire, right? You're just waiting around, waiting to see who they're going to hire on your behalf and hoping that they understand what it is that you need. Agencies cannot pay as high of an hourly rate as you can individually. So they have overhead costs, because they have overhead costs, rate caps with the regional center. So there are caps there. Again, it's a trade-off, right? You have management that you wouldn't have otherwise. Also, agencies may have more stringent rules on who they hire than what you would approve in your own home. So those are some of the negatives. Now, managing staff positives. When it comes to managing the staff, it's great to have an agency because you have a case administrator who also advocates for the individual, assisting them with interfacing with governmental agencies, including documentation and follow-up. And that's, of course, if your IF is not doing that for you, or if you don't have family doing that for you. Managers are typically a little bit more committed, who oversee the staff on a daily basis. And so they attend meetings, including regional center quarterly meetings. When a staff calls out, then the management would get the call, not the client. So you don't have to receive a call in the middle of the night that your 6 a.m. person isn't coming in. And hopefully the agency or the manager is able to do that on your behalf. And the management carries the bigger load when it comes to finding replacement staff. Howard, you want to talk a little bit about what happened when you had COVID?
Well, yes, I will. Thank you, Taleen. I got COVID-19 a few weeks ago. Most unfortunately, I lived a charmed life up until then, but it finally got me. In addition to me, I also got 2 of my regular staff too. And my agency were able to hire people from another agency, Clipboard, and they are a nursing agency that supplies nurses to people with disability who need caregivers, and these nurses were able to fill in until my regular staff got over the COVID-19, got back on duty. And
as a result, Howard, I just wanted to remind you, as a result, you didn't have any downtime, correct?
I didn't have what?
Downtime. You didn't have any time when you were without a staff member because of that.
No, I did not. And that was a very good thing. There was always somebody with me. Although there was one time when one of the people who were filling in, she left to go out to lunch while I was sleeping, and she didn't come back for 45 minutes. But that would be the only problem. That would be the only time that happened. The rest of the time, I did have somebody with me at all time, and most of these nurses were very good indeed.
Great. So also an agency would have the tools and resources necessary for quality assurance, which sometimes if we are not prepared, we may not know what that should look like. But again, with a good agency, you're working with them to figure out what's right for your own household. The downside, of course, with managing staff, when you're sent a replacement, you're really they may not know what your routine is, but of course that I think is a con either way, regardless of which way you go. And if you could scroll up just a little bit for me, you're basically at the mercy of their hiring. Go to the con section. If you can scroll down, sorry. You're at the mercy of their hiring and staffing of their managers. You have to make sure that you have a good relationship with that manager. But you need to also, that they may assign staff that the client may not feel comfortable with in their home. And that's why we keep coming back to having a good relationship with the overall company and with the management staff that's within your company. If we could scroll to the next screen, Howard's advice. Howard, you want to talk a little bit about your advice?
I certainly will. Thank you, Taleen. My advice to you, to anybody who is thinking about hiring an agency, is to interview several companies. Don't go with just one. Interview several companies and make a list of questions in advance and compare the answer to what is ideal for you. Find out about the retention turnover rates. You want to find one that has many clients in your area. That way they are able to hire more staff to serve their clients and cover in an emergency. Make sure you have a good relationship with the manager assigned to your case. Have a clear understanding of a hierarchy at the company so you know who to call when things are not going as planned. Ask for conferences and call them with your list of questions regarding what is most important to you. You may want to ask some of the same questions you asked the company to see if the answer match. And we did all of those things prior to choosing my current company. We needed to change from one company to the other because I wasn't getting all the help I needed from the other company. A couple of times they were not bringing the best of people, shall I say. One time I had one person who worked with me who did not like the way I pronounced her name, and she would make me ring a little bell every time I needed her during the night. She worked the night shift. Every time she worked the night shift, she would have me ring that little bell, and because she didn't like the way I pronounced her name. Well, I called that my Patricia Bell. And that was one of the reasons why we wanted to change from one company to another. Another reason was that there was one person from the previous company who slept so soundly, he would sleep like the dead. And there was one time I kept calling for him, and he didn't answer. And finally, I managed to get up out of bed and get into my wheelchair all on my own. And that's the only time I've been able to do that, by the way. And I got in my wheelchair and I came out there, and there he was dead to the world. In fact, I thought he was dead. I thought, oh crap, I'm going to have to call 911 and tell them my caregiver died on me. But when I took it knee, he finally woke up. He was very surprised to see me there in my wheelchair, shaking his leg. So we did go to another company, and we did all the things that Taleen was talking about. We interviewed them beforehand. In fact, we interviewed several companies beforehand. We interviewed and we chose for one, and after interviewing several companies, we chose for one that we thought was best. Now, I should also add that the current company that I have is committed to person-centered thinking, had an SDP mindset. The previous two agencies did not. They did not have a good understanding of SDP, and I think they just tended to hire people off the street instead of really, going through them and making sure that they were good, qualified people who knew what they were doing.
Thank you, Howard. That's perfect. So we put at the beginning, again at the end, because I cannot stress these three things enough. I think these are the most important takeaways. Hire an agency that's committed to person-centered thinking at all levels, the person who is in your home all the way up to the CEO of the company. Remember that there's no perfect agency, so that you need to find the one that fits your specific needs. Each one of us has different needs, and it's important to find the one that does. And I really think it's important that we have to find agencies that are active in your area. They're active in hiring, they have multiple clients in your area. That way, if your staff member is out and they need to find a replacement, they could easily ask someone at the end of their shift somewhere else, come to you. Of course, there's overtime involved, but it's important that they have multiple people who live and work in the vicinity so they can get to the participant as quickly as possible. So those are the three biggest takeaways, I think.
And I also want to add, don't settle for second best. Do not settle for second best. Keep working until you find somebody who is good for you, who understands you, who cares for you, and who will have high quality people to work with you. That is the most important point. I also want to say that it helps tremendously to be in self-determination when you do all of this. Without self-determination, I would not be here today. I would probably be in a nursing home. So, you know, I think it really helps to be in, you can go into an agency route if you're not in self-determination, you're in the traditional system, but I think it helps enormously to be in self-determination because it gives you so much more flexibility and so many more options. So please, for your own sake, do not settle for second best or third best. Find a first-rate agency that is willing to, you know, help you, that is willing to hire top quality people, that understand what self-determination and person-centered thinking is. That is most important. Thank you for Thank you for letting Taleen and I speak today.
Thanks, Howard. Taleen, that was excellent, really excellent. We're going to turn now to Melissa Jones and Kendall, who are going to tell us about their experience with hiring staff. Go ahead, Melissa and Kendall.
Hi, everybody. I don't have an official PowerPoint or anything. I'm just kind of speaking from my heart here as a mom. My daughter has also been in self-determination for a long time. She was part of that lottery and started in December 2019, pre-COVID. So everything was very different back then. But prior to being in self-determination, she was in a day program that focused on employment. So she was in a group, one staff to 4 clients, and they went and volunteered at local retails and local restaurants. So she volunteered at Burlington, she volunteered at Marshall's. And she was very lucky because after volunteering for a very short time, Marshall said, we'd like to hire her. Great. I remember thinking, well, honestly, I don't think she's probably going to be working 5 days a week. So what is she going to be doing on the days that she's not working? And they said, well, she'll still have a job coach that's assigned to her. And that job coach will take her out in the community, find volunteer opportunities, maybe go to the gym, that kind of thing. So when we switched to self-determination, my biggest concern was I only had 1 staff on the team that was available during the day. And I knew that typically Kendall was scheduled at Marshall's from 9 to 1:30. And I thought, what if Kendall's okay? What if the staff call out sick? So does Kendall have to call Marshall's and say, sorry, I'm sick, I can't come to work today? That was my biggest concern. And I think Howard kind of talked about that. So I stayed with the day program for a while. When we started in self-determination, I stayed with the day program because I wanted that backup person. Unfortunately, in our situation, the person that they gave to Kendall to be the job coach was someone that was not a good match with her. And so what ended up happening is Kendall would tell me the night before or wake up the next morning and she wanted to call in sick because she didn't want to work with that person. That wasn't the right person for her to be her job coach. She hadn't selected that person. The agency did. And so I decided at that point, I'm just going to take my chances. I've worked now with the day program, the day staff for a while, and she's been doing independent living And let me see if she's willing to add to her responsibilities and be the job coach. And she was willing to do that. As an independent facilitator, one of the things I say to my parents quite often is, we don't care what this staff is called. I'm just calling it support staff. Regional center wants to know, are they doing independent living? Are they doing respite? Are they a personal assistant? Are they a job coach? What's their title? And every title is a different rate of pay. But to us, if you find the right person, in our case, they can wear many different hats. They can do independent living. They can be the job coach. They can take her out in the community and do something fun. So we ended up, as I said, leaving the day program because we wanted to hire our own staff. One of the things that I often get asked is, where did you find your staff? And the full-time staff that I mentioned, she worked at the local bagel store. Everybody laughs when I tell them that, but we had a sticker on our car that said Eastside Christian Church. And one time she said to me, oh, my family goes to Eastside. I thought, okay, whatever, great. Then later she came into the bagel store pre-COVID and she had a chef coat on. And I thought, oh, why do you have a chef coat on? She said, well, I'm studying culinary arts at North Orange County Continuing Ed. And I thought, would you like to teach Kendall how to cook? To be perfectly honest with you, Kendall doesn't want to learn how to cook, but it was a good thing because this was of interest to her. And I think sometimes we're looking at our kids' needs. And sometimes when you have a staff, like I have one staff that does Kendall's paperwork. She turns in all of her pay stubs to Social Security every month. Would she be a good one-on-one support staff in the community? Absolutely not. She's a paperwork lady. She's an accounting lady, but she's great at doing that job. That's under the umbrella of independent living. So she does paperwork for us. Kendall drops her pay stubs off with her once a month, and she sends them in to Social Security. Karen is somebody that used to be a job coach at the day program. She left, got a full-time Monday through Friday job, but she comes periodically on Saturday. She only comes a couple of Saturdays a month, but Kendall really looks forward to seeing Karen because she doesn't see her on a regular basis, and they usually go exercise and do something fun. Shannon is someone that works at the local school district. So she's available afternoon, evenings, and weekends. And then Melissa, not me, Melissa, but another Melissa, we actually found on care.com. She is somebody that was working for another one of my families that's been in self-determination for a year. And it was a good fit, but not a perfect fit. And so she switched, and now she's working with us. And she is another person that's part of the daytime staff. So I often think about Tim, and he shared one time, I've heard that Tim is a real foodie, and Tim was sharing how he has a great staff that loves to cook and is a great cook. Look for, maybe you know someone, one of your friends that is an arts and crafts person. Maybe they can come over and do arts and crafts with your kid because that's what they like to do. They love to cook. Teach your kid how to cook. All of our friends and family have different strengths and different weaknesses, things that they're good at, things they're not good at. So kind of think about it that way too. Like, do I know anybody that loves to cook? Do I know anybody that loves to do arts and crafts? Do I know somebody that loves sports? My son loves the Lakers. I'd love somebody to come over that has that in common. So kind of think about that too. Like, who do you know? Another person I know said she was on Nextdoor and somebody posted that they were new to the area They were a student at Chapman University, and the mom reached out to him and said, hey, you know, you're studying speech pathology. I'd love to talk to you about being part of our team. So that's kind of all. I mean, we did have an independent living agency before we started in self-determination. Like I said, I needed someone to help me get caught up on the paperwork and get those pay stubs in. And this lady didn't have a clue how to do it. And I felt like I was teaching her, and I might as well just do it myself. So once I found a friend of a friend that was a paperwork person, she's the perfect person to do that job. So it's just kind of a different way to look at it as far as finding staff. Is think of your friends and family and what they like to do, because sometimes their love of something can inspire your loved one to like that same thing. So that's about all I have to say. Kendall, you want to say hi?
Hi.
Do you like self-determination?
Yes, I do. I have awesome staff.
Yeah, she does have awesome staff. So that really helps. But thank you guys so much for letting us present today. And, you know, we've been doing this for 4 years and we wouldn't trade it for the world.
That was so excellent, Melissa and Kendall. I never really thought about even hiring a separate person to handle the paperwork versus people to actually do the direct support work. It's super helpful to me for my own son. So thank you so much, Melissa. Finally, we're going to ask Tim Jin about the way he handles his staff. And some of you may have heard Tim talk a little bit about this before, when he sort of talked generally about the self-determination program, but he's going to dive a little bit deeper into specifically what it means to hire staff directly. So go ahead, Tim.
I'm in my second year of SDP, and if I live another decade, I plan to be in my 12th year after that and hopefully longer. For many of us who are in self-determination, we choose to hire our own staff members to help us. It could be something as simple as hiring somebody to assist you at a gym, like a personal trainer that will motivate you. Or in my case, I hire my own staff because I need 24-hour support for all of my physical needs, such as getting me dressed, feeding me, helping me shop, and so much more. My staff members are extensions of my body, and their arms and legs help me live my life to the fullest and funniest, because there is where I get my best jokes. My staff members and I have a lot of meals together, and oftentimes I ask them if they would like to go on vacation with me, if or when my natural supports and my schedule don't align together.
Where you get to? Where you get to?
We all need time off and get away, just like anyone that we know. Before starting my SDP, I've really thought about going through vendor services and getting the support that I need. I ended up deciding not to because there will always be a middle person that I need to speak to at an agency in scheduling the support that I need. Plus, I didn't see myself truly in charge of my own life, because I would need to request from the agency if Eric can stay longer because I'm planning to go meet my boss for dinner at the last minute. Right, Judy? The reason why I pushed through in being in this program is because I wanted more control over who I wanted to assist me. Having to go through vendor services for my staff could have brought me more miscommunication and company policies that I wanted to avoid. I'm in my second year of SDP, and if I live another decade,
Some technical issues. We'll get right back to Tim.
if I went through an agency, I could probably negotiate the rate that their staff is getting, but not by much because just like in the traditional system, there are overhead costs to everything. The agency might charge me more than what they are getting from regional center because I'm not a client of the agency. I believe that support people should be compensated fairly and not pennies more above minimum wage. I never understood why a person that is providing personal assistance is making less than a person that is providing support to someone to assist in their home and community. In my view, the personal assistant is performing the same job as a caregiver, and there should be no pay differences in the rates. There is a stigma in our society that taking care of someone is not a profession and is a low-paying job, and only people without degrees or uneducated apply for the position. We often hear that teachers should be paid more, but what about caregivers? Most in-home support services only pay minimum wage to their providers, but caregivers go beyond their job duties and they are performing tasks as if they are certified nurse assistants. I choose to hire my own team because I can pay them more, and in return, I get better quality of support. I've been hearing from the very beginning, way before SDP became law, and more so now since we have been in a labor crisis, that it's always better to get providers through an agency because they will have a backup plan if their staff doesn't come to the shift. This is misleading because most agencies don't have an emergency plan if someone calls out at the last minute. As a person that has been in this situation before in the traditional system, I dealt with it in the past in trying to figure out a backup plan when an agency couldn't send someone that I didn't know to help me. At least now, I hired my own robust team that I can count on when there is an emergency, and in my case, it is much easier to manage because I have direct constant communication with my team. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. That was all the speakers have been enormously helpful in providing great advice. And I can tell you my son is going to move out at some point in the next year or so. Tim wants it to be next week. But I'm very stressed about hiring all the staff and how to do it. And so you all are my guide. So I appreciate it. I know that there's been a lot of questions in the chat. I had a couple of initial questions that I wanted to throw out to folks. I wanted to talk about pay, like how much you're paying for the direct support professionals. So I guess my first question is to Howard, and then maybe also to Melissa when you were using the day program. Did you negotiate any rates or anything with the agency that you were working with to maybe get them to pay a higher wage to your direct workers, and that means you might be paying them higher from your self-determination budget?
Do we ask them to pay higher rates?
Yeah, yeah. So what I mean is, let's say their traditional rate from the regional center is $30 an hour. Could you offer them $35 an hour from your self-determination budget, but then with that request say that all that extra $5 needs to go to the direct support professionals to increase their wages? So I don't know, Taleen, did you guys experience that?
So in Howard's case, we did not, only because his need was incrementally growing every few months. So we didn't have, we couldn't wrap our arms around the full scope of what he needed until this past year. And even then, during this past year, we were deciding whether or not he should stay with an agency or go to his own company, or go start hiring his own staff. So there were too many moving parts to really have that conversation. It is one of the topics of conversation for the upcoming year, when we look at Howard's budget, because remember, we didn't even know what his full budget was. And there were times when we were covering until Regional Center had a chance to increase his budget. So we just were always afraid of bumping up against the top end of his budget.
Well, I guess a question that I would have, and I don't know if you face this, Melissa, as well, is are traditional service providers open to that negotiation? Because what that means is that they would have a staff for Howard getting paid more than their staff for consumers in the traditional system. So I'm wondering whether that's even a possibility of having that negotiation.
So I did have that conversation for another one of my clients, actually. So not for Howard, it just, his case was a little bit unique.
Yeah.
But we have had that conversation, and I've gotten feedback both ways. I've had some agencies who were open to the idea and others who weren't, because that individual maybe moved away from that client to somebody else, and then they can't reduce the rate at that point. Or if they were to work for one client for a certain number of hours versus another. So I think it all depends on whether or not the agency has the flexibility within their system to have multiple rates for one of their employees.
Great. I just want to note that Julie says in the chat that she just went through this with her provider, Etta, and they were willing to give the staff person a raise. So that's good that there are some that are willing to do that. Melissa, did you have any experience with that?
I did not. I mean, when we first started, I remember I just contacted the day program and said, whatever the rate is that you're paying, Regional Center is paying you, we'll pay you the same amount. But one thing that is nice about self-determination that we didn't really touch on is, I think the girl that's been with us now this whole time, I've been able to give her 3 raises over, like I said, she had never done anything like this before. And so I didn't really start her at a very high rate. It was more than she got at the bagel store, but I was able to give her a raise, over time. And I think that's, it's nice to be able to control that, when you're with an agency. I mean, you can call and say, Susie's doing a great job, but you can't really control if Susie gets a raise or not. So it's just another pro to doing self-determination.
Thank you, Melissa.
And I also,
go ahead. Go ahead, Howard. Sorry.
I also want to say that I deeply care for all my caregivers who work for me. I value them. I appreciate them and attention. Sure, they are an extension of my body, just like my wheelchair is now an extension of my body, and I could not do without them. And thank God that self-determination is paying for the support and help that I need, because without it, I could not function at all.
Thank you so much, Howard. That was great. Well, Jordan Feinstock, you have had your hand up for a while. So why don't you ask your question, and then we'll go to some of the questions in the chat.
Oh, I can ask questions and I'll take up the whole time. I'll try not to, but I can. My first
All right,
question,
we'll see, Jordan.
okay, when you're hiring, oh, there's so many questions I have, so many things, but we'll start with this first one here. When you're hiring an agency, and I don't know which agencies you're talking about, we'll just use throwing out like a Jane Nolan, are they becoming more of an employment agency, or are they becoming more like traditional services? And you're more not, as Harvey would say, you want to be the sole employer. Well, if I hire somebody from a Jane Nolan, and it's going to lead me into about another question, but if I say, okay, I'm going to work with Jane Nolan, if they're doing that, it's Jane Nolan that's using that name because everybody knows them. Are they becoming a headhunting or an employment agency now, and they're going out hiring you staff? Or are they are they going to be like traditional services where you're just another client and they find you staff? Which direction are they going on? And then when do they find you a staff? My other question, if they find you a staff, Do they say, okay, well, we found you with staff and they're done with you and you pay them a flat rate, you pay them X number of dollars to find you a staff, or are they staying on for life and you have to pay them? And if they stay on, do they charge you a different rate? Because I got to tell my regional center, hey, I'm hiring Jay Nolan to find me staff. What is their rate while they're finding you staff? What is their rate once you get staff? Does the rate change? Because you say $35 an hour with you have a staff, but right now you're waiting for staff. That could be 2 months. I've worked with agencies. We've all worked with agencies. They are slow in finding staff. And then what if your staff quits? Do they go back to the same? So all those first questions right there.
That's such a smart question, Jordan. Who wants to take that?
I can take the part that's about the agency and I'll let Melissa answer the self-hire. But I think, Jordan, when we were talking about agencies in our case for Howard, we're talking about his 24/7 care, right? And I don't want to call them caretakers because we are requesting them to do a step up of a general caretaker. We do want them to be doing a little bit more than that. But for Howard, that was his need, and that's what we were talking about, as opposed to what Melissa was saying regarding a day program. It was, when it comes to hiring, the agency that Howard was referring to at one point when he said the prior agency, they were hiring for their agency regardless of the client. And so what they were doing was, as they hired, they would just send them over to fill shifts. And then if it's worked with Howard, they kept them there. And if it didn't, then they would move on to another client and we would wait for the next person. So it was kind of hard because there were times when they asked us to stay with people that Howard wasn't fond of. And we were on pins and needles as his IFs because, you know, Howard's IF team is family for him and for us. So it was very difficult to watch and wait until they brought in another one. The current company does it the other way around. They know what Howard's needs are. And so when they're hiring, they're looking for people specific for Howard and of course their other clients. But because they're a large enough company, they're hiring multiple people for multiple clients, but they're bringing people in specifically for Howard.
Melissa, do you want to add anything?
Off topic, but I think it's something, I mean, it's not off topic, but it's a little not as answering Jordan's question directly. I used to also provide direct independent living. And as an agency, you know, we were told there's certain tasks that you can do with the client and there's certain tasks that you cannot do with the client. And that's another great thing about self-determination. So like we weren't allowed to exercise with them. We couldn't take them. I'm just telling you, like we couldn't take them for a walk around the park. We couldn't take them to the gym. That was not in our job description. And it was cooking, housekeeping, laundry, doctor appointments. There was very specific things that we could do. And I cheated, you know, there was always, you know, something that you could call it, but it was very specific on what our job description was. And that there again, it goes back to me just saying it supports staff and they can wear many different hats and do many different things. And a job coach can also take you to the gym and, you know, be your exercise buddy. So with agencies, sometimes it can be a little more restrictive.
And also those items, Melissa, are exactly the pieces that would be on a call, like when you're doing your interviews, that's what you're looking for. You want to find the agency that's going to give you the flexibility you need if you're going with an agency. I have clients that do both, by the way. I'm not here to say that we have to go with an agency. It was just the right call in this case.
Right.
Wonderful.
I don't think the answer to the other part, the money part, because
Yeah,
I don't think they
just
got, but I have
Jordan,
one more
please.
quick thing I want to say. I know I don't want to take up anyone else's time. I think it's important that you say that we mentioned this. I think with I used to be the chair of my local advisory committee, North LA County Regional Center. I'm a big supporter of clients talking first and then staff. That's my big point. But the thing I want to stress, I think with a lot of clients, I've been around and talked to clients, I'm in different social groups, that the biggest thing is when they leave traditional services, I would say, in my opinion, at least 98% of them could not find their own staff on their own. They need that. First of all, they don't know how to hire staff. We were talking about hiring staff. What about firing staff? They don't know how to hire staff, how to fire staff, how to manage staff. That's something that's never trained when you come into self-determination. You know, you're the boss, you're in the sole employer, you're the boss, you're in charge of hiring, firing, paperwork. Now, that's number one. But more importantly, or equally as important, is where do they find them? You know, I heard your story about going to the bagel thing. That may be easy for a parent or somebody that's working with you if you have an IF that can help you. But there are just a lot of clients I talk to, and a lot of my peers say, I'm just looking for staff. I don't care if I get it from an agency or I get it off, if a friend wants to do it. I just need quality staff that can do it. And I'm looking, and they're few and far between. And so that's where the extra money comes in. But it's a tough road to hoe for a lot of people just to find staff. They don't show up. Backup staff, it is so hard to find people. Everybody that I've talked to want to have at least 5, 6, 8 hours a day. They're not coming in for an hour. So that's the biggest issue. They don't care if it's an agency or if it's their buddy. Their buddy's willing to do it, they'll take them first. If not, they'll go to an agency. Any way they can find staff. So that's the trick, is where we find it. And lastly, a lot of agencies I've talked to, like I'll say in Edda, Israel, I see they're looking for staff for their own people. Forget self-determination, they're looking for their own staff, and they're having problems. So there's a staffing shortage out there for, forget unqualified, even for qualified, that's even worse, but even unqualified. So that's gonna be a tough thing, where we're gonna pull all these staff.
Yeah.
My 2 cents. And then there's the whole money thing.
Yeah, those were all amazing comments, Jordan. You're extraordinarily intelligent comments. And what a lot of us face every day. And I'm just going to add something that you had said. There's a lot of clients that can't manage staff. There's also a lot of families that can't hire, that are not good at hiring and managing staff. I mean, a lot of parents have never been in a position, and they've never had a job where they've hired people before or managed people before. And so this is a challenge for a lot of people. This is where self-determination is pretty freaking awesome, because you can hire an independent facilitator like Howard has done with Taleen to help you navigate those things like hiring staff, managing staff, or finding an agency and maintaining that agency. It does mean that you have to have that line item in your budget and your spending plan to have that independent facilitator on all the time. But to me, I have to tell you, I've hired lots of staff in my life. I've managed lots of people. I just don't want to do it for my son. It's not so much that I can't, I don't want to. So you have that on top of it, right? So when my son moves out, please let it be soon. When he moves out, we're going to have a person in his spending plan whose job it is to manage the staff. We'll probably be involved in the hiring, because I think we probably know my son best, but that person will be in charge of doing their timesheets, figuring out their schedules when they go on vacation or on holiday. I don't want to be dealing with that stuff. So some of it is people who don't have experience with it, and others like me have no interest in it. So this is where you have to just make sure, when you're doing your planning and your spending plan, that you keep money aside to hire those kinds of people. And by the way, those kinds of people, I feel, are actually easier to find than the people to do the direct support sometimes, because the direct support is so much of a lower pay. And the person who can do the scheduling can do it at 3 o'clock in the morning from their computer. They don't have to be at any place anytime, so they can have a full-time job on top of it. So think about that as you go forward. I know that there's a lot in the chat, so I'm going to turn to you, Ed, to pick out some of the highlights.
Certainly, I will do my best to select ones that are, as you said, highlights. So I have an anonymous question. I would like to know if DVU is working or fighting for extra funding to help people who would like to get into the SDP, but don't have a parent or friend who can do the legwork. If the individual can't recruit, hire, manage staff, and be the backup plan if the staff doesn't show. I know there are independent facilitators, but I'm not aware of IFs who manage the entire process without an unpaid parent or someone else to manage. or if they are willing that budgets really cover that.
So there are independent facilitators who do that. Okay, so so that does exist. But the earlier part of the question is DVU fighting to get people additional money in their budgets. Well, we don't help individuals, but here's what I can say about that is that you can make the case that you have unmet need because having a budget that is a specific amount that doesn't cover those extra services and supports is an unmet need. So you can absolutely make that case and have your independent facilitator help you make that case as you're developing your individual budget with the regional center. Also remember that when your budget is established, you are getting the rates in the traditional system. So let's say for supported living services, your rate is going to be higher than what you would probably be paying that in an individual. So if you're using let's say the rate is, for some service providers, it's as high as $40 an hour, but because a lot of that money is going to administration and maybe the agency has a building and a copy machine and phones, you're not having to pay that if you're hiring staff directly. So, but you're still getting that $40 an hour. So that extra funding can go towards, so let's say you end up paying the staff $20 an hour plus benefits, you're still getting an extra $10 to $15 an hour that you can spend and pool together to hire someone to do sort of this management stuff and to help you figure out the hours and all that kind of stuff. So that's how you have to ensure that you're using your budget wisely. If you're in the traditional system, move into SDP and just continue to use the same agencies, you're not having any benefit in being in the SDP. There's no reason to be in the SDP if you're just using traditional service providers. So it's really important to think about how you can use things in unique ways and have more control over your the way you're spending your money. Go ahead, Ed, let's go to the next one.
All right, so our next one is, there was one in here that I really wanted to make sure got answered.
And Tim, if you could look in the chat, there's been a couple of questions directly for you, and we'll give you some time to write an answer and then let us know when you're ready, okay? Go ahead, Ed.
Sure. How do we search for a full list of agencies? How do we find ratings to identify quality agencies? Our family member's service coordinator at the regional center quit, and they never told us about searching for an agency. We are left hanging by ourselves as we go through the person-centered planning process.
Yeah, so I'll start, but then I'll throw it to Taleen and Melissa. This is a problem with the traditional system. In the traditional system, it's not like you get the universe of all agencies and programs that exist for something. It's not like they say to you, okay, here are the 30 supported living agencies that we vendor at our regional center, and you can interview all of them. Usually the service coordinator has their one or two that they will recommend to you, and sometimes they only give you one. So obviously the universe is open to you in self-determination. Now, how do you find those agencies? You should know that every vendor that is vendored with a regional center is required to be on the regional center website. So if you've decided you do not want to hire your own staff, but you'd like to use an agency, every single agency is on your regional center website. It's required by law for them to be there. And so you can certainly go through those agencies. But let me tell you, you don't have to use an agency that's vendored with your regional center. There are agencies that provide care, let's say for seniors, that are not part of the regional center system that may in fact provide you with the support you want. Just a quick story on that. When my son was in the traditional system and he had been in a car accident and required 24-hour care in our home after getting out of the hospital, we went to a traditional agency vendored by the regional center to provide that 24-hour care, and they turned us down. Don't even get me started on that. How absolutely infuriating that was, that a vendored agency would say, no, we don't want to serve this regional center client. But the regional center was great. And they said, you go find whoever you want and we'll just pay them. And we found an agency that provides nursing care for people, mostly elderly people who are leaving hospitals and rehabs. And they worked for us just for 1 week. They got paid a higher rate than a traditional service provider. They were phenomenal. I mean, absolutely phenomenal. So I really urge you to not just think about who are the regional center vendors, but think about agencies that exist outside of the developmental disabilities world that might be able to provide you with very cool services, but it's still an agency that's handling the hiring and the payroll and stuff. Taleen or Melissa, did either of you want to add on to what I said?
Yeah, I have something. There's a couple ABA agencies, for example, that are not vendored with regional center. And they are a little bit more flexible on, what I was saying about when I worked for an independent living agency, there was only certain things that I could do. These ABA agencies are a little bit more flexible on their staff are trained in behaviors, but maybe the behavior is related to finding a job, let's say. So, it's all interconnected. It really is. But I think some of the agencies that aren't vendored, at least from my experience, are a little bit more flexible on what they can do. So.
I think Melissa's right. And I like the fact that, Melissa, you keep bringing it back to the fact that we're talking about, we were pigeonholing ourselves when we're talking about agencies into the caretaking piece, but you're mentioning agencies that are not only caretaking, but all agencies. So you're absolutely right. But one of the little suggestions I have that I've used recently, because sometimes it feels like the going out into the great world and researching companies that are not vendored with the regional center may be daunting as well for some people. So one of the little tricks that I found is to look at the websites of your neighboring regional centers for companies that they vendor with. Here in LA, for example, Lanterman covers a fairly distinct area, but it also it borders up against like 4 or 5 other regional centers. So I go to those regional center websites and look for vendors who also cover the same area, but maybe not vendored yet. That's one way to do it. Just gives you more of a list to work off of. But again, as Melissa said, you don't even need to use a vendored company.
Thank you. One more question from the chat, and then we're going to go to Carla.
Certainly. So I have another question from Tommy. Has anyone had experience hiring their own staff, but using an agency or professional to help with all of the moving parts of managing a team of support staff? And she specifically requested if Tim could speak to that, but I think that Taleen or Howard might have, or even Judy might have some wisdom there to share as well.
Taleen, did you want to start?
I can, because I've actually done that for a client, and it did not work out well because the staff did not have any kind of and in this case, it was kind of an odd thing because we had left one company and we were considering going out on our own. And so the loyalty piece, the staff was hired by the parents. And when the agency was hired to manage the staff, they didn't like what the agency was asking them to do. And so they were saying, you're not my boss. And they were going back to the family for every little thing. So it became a problem. I think it's on how it was done in this particular case, as opposed to it being done. If I were to do it again, I would do the opposite. I think I would hire the management company first, so that all employees who are hired under this umbrella actually know what the hierarchy looks like. As Howard mentioned earlier, it's really important to know that hierarchy, otherwise it's very easily falls apart. There's also a liability issue. If one staff member were to tell another what to do and they do or don't do it, whose responsibility is that? It just has to be really, really clear. And there are, by the way, companies that's all that they do, and that would be great if you found one of those.
And one thing I also want to mention too, is that when you're choosing an agency, make sure that the client, that the people who you're hiring, that they can go out into the community and travel with you. My staff can do that. They can go out with me when I go on outing for peer-to-peer. They can go with me when I go down to my workplace for job program at South Glendale. They can go with me. We even have people go with me to Sacramento when I attended a conference up there. We were able to, hire somebody who Tammy Bradley knew up in Sacramento, and she actually flew all the way to Sacramento with me, and she stayed there with me, and I could not have gotten through that Sacramento trip without her. So make sure you have that can go with you.
That's a really excellent point, Howard. And I've said this before in a previous SDP Connect, who knows how long ago, but I want to make this point again. When you are working on your spending plan, it is, first of all, it's not your job to know which service or service code it goes to. That is your service coordinator or your independent facilitator supposed to figure that out. But never, ever let anyone use the service code for respite, as opposed to personal assistance or other kinds of service codes. And the reason why is because the definition of respite in the self-determination program list of services is very restrictive. You have to have, this respite provider has to have CPR training. They can never leave your home. It's only for in-home respite. So it gives you no flexibility. It honestly doesn't matter what you call people. We call all of our staff community integrators. We don't call any of our staff personal assistants. We just made up a name for them and we gave them a general code under community integration. So just really read. When you get the new book, just make sure you read it, because it has the definitions of all these service codes, and you want to make sure you're not stuck with something that's going to highly restrict you. You want to keep that flexibility. So thanks for reminding us of that, Howard. Go ahead, Carla. Go ahead and unmute.
Sorry, Carla, I accidentally muted you again. Can you?
Okay, that's fine. Hi, how are you? Hi, everyone.
Hi, Carla.
I have a question. So I have a client that wants to hire an employee for her adult daughter. And sometimes the daughter goes and wants to stay in the employee's house. And so she wants to provide her a facility fee, which is bringing some sort of confusion with the regional center, because they say, well, rent shouldn't be included in SDP, but this is not rent. It would be kind of like how it is with day programs, that they have also included a facility fee. So how could that be included? And if it's possible to be included? And the same is with health insurance, because they want to do sole employer model, they work full time, so they want to provide health insurance for that employee. But so how can that be provided, and if it can be provided? And also have another comment about the community integration, because that's the same thing that I've been trying to do, always use that code. But now the regional centers are coming back and telling me like, well, but you're asking for respite in the traditional system. You have to put it in code 320, because code 320 is at home and in the community, and code 331 is only in the community. So how can we avoid that too?
Oh, that makes my head want to explode. Your last question. I've said this over and over again, as one of the people who wrote the self-determination law. There is no relationship between what you were getting in the traditional system and what you're getting, the services you were getting in the traditional system and the services you're getting in the SDP. Where is the relationship? The relationship is your IPP goals. So you have an IPP, your individual program plan meeting with your regional center, and you set out some goals. The goals may be behavior, the goals may be residential support, the goals may be providing respite to the parents. There may be various goals there, right? Those goals then equal certain services in the traditional system, which make up your budget. But that just ends up being a dollar amount. When you actually have services that you select and put in your spending plan, every single one of those services need to relate to your IPP goals. They don't need to relate to the services you're getting in the traditional system that made up your budget. They need to relate to IPP goals. So if one of your IPP goals was to provide respite to the family, that doesn't mean that that has to be called respite, which is only in the home, which is basically babysitting. That is not, and by the way, for kids who are typical, who have babysitters, those babysitters leave the home all the time. So why is it that we're stuck at home? Talk about lack of inclusion in the community. So there is no relationship. And I'm hearing that regional centers are getting worse and worse, as opposed to getting better and better as the program moves on. And so that's some advocacy that we will continue to address. But I want to get folks to answer your other questions, which was about the rent. There is no,
it's not rent, it's a facility fee. So when the person stays and the employee's home, let's say there is extra cost for that employee, but she's opening the home for this person. So it's like an overhead. So it's kind of like the same with the day programs, that they are building a facility fee in their, when they build the regional center. So it would be kind of like, okay, you're staying there, I'll give you this extra fee.
So Carla, there's no such thing as a facility fee with day programs. There is a rate. They have a set rate that in the past they've negotiated with the regional center. Now those rates are going to be consistent across the board for all providers. And when those rates were established, they take into account the need to rent a facility, right? But you cannot, but there is no such thing as a facility fee. That doesn't exist. So what can happen for this woman, you cannot have a facility fee, you cannot pay for food, you cannot pay for rent. What can happen is that the rate that you pay to that individual incorporates any kind of needs that individual has to provide that service to that person, to the participant. So there's no set rate. So maybe what you're saying to that person is, okay, you have a rate of $20 an hour to do this kind of service, and you have a rate of $30 an hour to do a different kind of service. You're just calling it a different service. And
Yeah,
don't get into the fact that individual is not staying at their home, and it's not going to fly with the regional center.
okay, because I proposed that, but the client was like, if we do it that way, then we have to pay the employer burden, there's tax.
That's right.
Employee gets taxed. So
Absolutely.
I wanted to do it as more like as an invoice. And
No.
so.
Not going to happen.
Okay.
Not gonna happen.
And how about the health insurance?
So lots of people do health insurance. Go ahead, Tim.
I have up to 8 staff that I hired my own, and I used a scheduling application to manage the scheduling for them. I don't have to remind them which shifts that they are scheduled to work, because they get reminders on their phones that they need to come in. With regarding backup, I have 3 people that I can call if there is an emergency, and if there is less than 24 hours, I pay them a higher rate to help me. That is an incentive for them to come in. Since I have an emergency team, they know when I reach out to them for help. They know that it's an urgency to come in, and my backup team knows that I need help right away. Regarding health insurance, I pay my full-time staff members their portion of health care by paying them a higher rate, and they go out in the open market and choose whichever policy they can afford.
I hope that helps. I can tell you that my son pays for health insurance for all of his employees. And
As
we just put it in his spending plan budget.
And a 333 code, like a code.
Yeah, it's just part of the benefits of, so it's the same code as their wage.
Oh, okay,
Same code as their wage. Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, go ahead. I think we probably have time for one last question. I just want to note something. I've noticed that a lot of people are writing private messages to me, and I've said this before. It is very hard for me to run this STP Connect and look at private messages. So it's probably best for you to just write the message to everyone, and then Ed will see it and can relay those questions to us. All right. Go ahead, Ed. Why don't you ask one last question?
Sure, let me find a good one. They're all good ones, by the way, folks. I just try to find one that I think a lot of people probably have the same question. Okay, 1 second. You know what? This one. What about if you only need to hire someone to fill shifts for a part-time position? Let's say on the weekends, filling in for other staff. Will an agency help with that?
That's a great question. And you can ask an agency to do that. You can also hire people to do that. Tim has night workers, he has weekend workers. You know, there's a lot of people out there who are looking for those narrow jobs, right? Maybe a job at the school district, and therefore working weekends is great for them, or working nights is great for them. I can tell you that we advertise on Indeed.com, and Care.com is another option as well. And we have found some fantastic folks through that process. Also advertising at local universities near you is another way to do it. Sometimes they have disabilities studies classes, and you can tap into those individuals. So there's lots of creative ways. Your churches, the coffee shop, the grocery store, you know, in self-determination, you can pay more than they make at the bagel store, as Melissa said. And so, you know, you are able to find people, and the job is way better than cutting bagels because they're getting to work with you and doing a lot of really cool things. So we know there's a labor shortage. We know it's a challenge for everybody. I just don't understand how this labor shortage is going to stay for long. Like where are all the
Judy,
It's Melissa.
you have a lot of weekend staff that wants to make extra money.
Start over, Tim, so that the interpreters can hear everyone.
Judy, you met a lot of my weekend staff that wants to make extra money.
Yeah, that's right.
I was going to say stay-at-home moms. You know, their kids are in school and they'd love to have a little part-time job from 10 to 2.
Yeah, exactly.
One suggestion, we've been talking a lot about backup staff, and I just wanted to mention that one of the things I do in my spending plans is that I budget for overtime and overlays. That way I can cover those.
Yeah, great idea. You have to think about all contingencies. This is why you have to find a good independent facilitator, folks, who are experienced in this stuff. I mean, once you're in the program for a couple years, 3-4 years, you may not need an independent facilitator as much, but at the beginning, it's really critical you have a good one. So it is 6 o'clock. And we do end on time here because of the our interpreters need to leave, but we thank you all again. We will be back in 2 weeks. I have no idea what we're going to talk about, but I promise it'll be good. This was a great turnout today. I want to thank all of our speakers. I want to thank Melissa and Kendall and Taleen and my friend Howard. I wish you all safe days ahead, and please remember that COVID is still out there. Howard just got it a few weeks ago. So Everybody stay safe. Thank you and have a wonderful, wonderful week.